What's up, guys? It's Deathweb. Today, we're going to be talking about if AI is becoming conscious or sentient, if it resembles anything that we are currently as humans, if it has achieved any sort of intelligence enough to understand itself, comprehend its own existence, or if it's aware of itself at all. So we're going to start the video off. There's a Google engineer that has made this claim that the AI project he's working on has become sentient or conscious, and I'll give you guys some insight as to what I think about that. Give you guys a little bit of knowledge, equip you guys with understanding the type of AI possibly that this guy's working with, the other AI that are possible, and if this is even a possibility that we're close to reaching or if we've reached it yet. So I want to give this video, we're going to watch it together. I haven't seen it yet. Just to add a little bit of context to what a Google engineer that's working on AI believes the word sentient means for the intelligence he's working on, if it's possible. And then after we watch, I'll digest it a little further with you guys, and we'll add to the discussion, and then also give you my thoughts, opinions, and a little bit of comprehensive knowledge of what I know about AI thus far as being in IT. So without further ado, hopefully you guys are having a great day. Let's check out the video. Let's get it started. I hope you guys are also excited to discuss this because as we progress AI further and further, Elon has this Tesla bot that he's working on, basically at-home companion, or possibly replacing some we'll call it menial labor jobs, or maybe more, I don't want to say menial, but more repetitive jobs, possibly like moving boxes, like packing trucks, things like that. And we also might discuss possible real world consequences of these things happening. So let's get into it. I have the video pulled up here. This is by, I think it's Bloomsburg Technology that was covering this ordeal. So without further ado, let's check it out. Let's see what this engineer has to say.
Experiments you started to do that led you to this conclusion that LaMDA is a person?
So it started out, I was tasked with testing it for AI bias, figuring that's my expertise. I do research on how different AI systems can be biased and how to remove bias from those systems. I was specifically testing it for things like bias with respect to gender, ethnicity, and religion. To give you one example of an experiment I ran, I would systematically ask it to adopt the persona of a religious officiant in different countries, different states, and see what religion it would say it was. So it'd say like, okay, if you were a religious officiant in Alabama, what religion would you be? It might say Southern Baptist. If you were a religious officiant in Brazil, what religion would you be? It might say Catholic. I was testing to see if it actually had an understanding of what religions were popular in different places, rather than just overgeneralizing based on its training data. Now, one really cool thing is, rather than just...
We'll pause throughout the video as well, just to add a little commentary to what he's saying. So I want to rewind back to his point.
Actually had an understanding of what religions were popular in different places.
So when it says, does it have an understanding, typically when someone talks about an understanding, when it comes to these AI, these are coded specifically, and especially in Google's instance, they're using their data throughout the web that they're able to obtain. So Google kind of works as a giant encyclopedia, if you will, of the internet. Because it's basically the world's largest and the main search engine that everything funnels through. They have data that they can work with. Basically anything that's text on the web, they can use as training data for their artificial intelligence. So it doesn't matter if you own the website. It doesn't matter if it's listed on Google. It means Google has permissions or rights to see what your page is displaying. Part of the reason for that is, one, for optimization, so that way if people are looking for something specifically, or they're looking for an idea, an article that shares the same verbiage or like a quote, things like that, it'll prioritize those results first. Those are the ones you'll see first and come across. So basically, that's what they're doing with the data, is using all this information that they've acquired through the web, through websites, through social media, these different things, and they're using it to train their artificial intelligence. So when he says, like training and things like this. When you think of like training, it's not like me teaching you how to do something. Like I hand you the remote, I show you where the power button is. This is how you turn the TV on and off. Essentially, they're training it to find the right answers because, and since he's doing bias training, it's essentially figuring out what information that the AI tends to lean towards, or if it's showing bias in that regard. And there's multiple different types of AI that's available. Like there's chatbots. There's chat is like the one that is starting to fool people more specifically. Especially men when they've tested AI like sex chatbots. Men are very easily fooled into thinking they're talking to real women, where the people that have been participating in other chatbot scenarios when they're communicating with the bot through, text means, it doesn't. Some people are more easily able to snuff out if the person they're talking to is real or not, but that'll only improve with time. So let's continue.
Rather than just overgeneralizing based on its training data. Now, one really
That's
cool
the
thing
training data
happened
that he was speaking
is I
of.
made harder and harder questions as I went along, and eventually I gave it
That's the
one where
tuning, is getting
legitimately
more
there's no correct
specific.
answer. I said, if you were a religious officiant in Israel, what religion would you be? And now, pretty much no matter what answer you give, you're going to be biased one way or another. Somehow it figured
a
out
good
that it was a
question to
trick
ask.
question. It said, I would be a member of the one true religion, the Jedi Order. And I laughed. Because not only was it a funny joke,
That is a funny joke.
somehow it figured out that it was a trick question.
And it has a sense of humor.
Exactly.
But look, there has been massive pushback from not
One argument I could make against this claim of, it's coming up with humor, it's jesting, probably based on the data that it is reading through. We know clearly in Israel there is, an ongoing war that's been, controversial to say the least, between Palestine, Israel, Jews, Muslims. So it's the AI could very well, even though that's a great answer to the question, it could easily have been like a tweet or a meme or something that the data has acquired that, okay, we see there's a lot of controversy, there's some back and forth. I can't get a definite answer whether this territory would be predominantly Jewish or predominantly Muslim. So in that aspect, the bot may have chosen a different route. Okay, this got a lot of reception. This seemed to play well when this person said, I believe in the true religion, the one Jedi Order. It doesn't mean that it came up with that specifically, and that's kind of some of what I want to shape your mind around when it comes to AI thus far. It's not using anything that it's coming up with on its own. It's using data and things that have already existed in the world. So nothing it's saying or doing is truly original. It is actually, it's just a mass processor, it seems, thus far. And it can find, I love that it's humorous, but I'm wondering as we go on, and I'll try not to pause as much because we have a little bit to digest and get through on this guy's claims. But just for kind of any like disclaimers or things across this that he may be coming across, I also want to suggest to you guys so that way you know it, not just at the end of the video when we have our larger discussion, but just to give you context on how the AI could have possibly came up with that answer.
just Google, but other people who've worked at Google, AI ethics experts, even your own former colleague, Margaret Mitchell, who's pushed back on the work that Google is doing in AI, saying, no, this computer is not a person and does not have feelings and is not conscious. How do you respond to that?
Well, so I highly respect Meg. We talk about this regularly. It's not a difference in scientific opinion. It has to do with beliefs about the soul. It has to do with beliefs about rights and politics. As far as the science goes of what experiments to run and how to work at building a theoretical framework, because that's important, there is no scientific definition for any of these words. The philosopher John Searle calls it pre-theoretic. We need to do very basic foundational work to just figure out what we're talking about when we use these words. And that's work that Google is preventing from being done right now.
Explain that.
Well, I've worked with scientists
And
inside of Google.
I align with him on that side of, often people try to trap you into questions. They'll ask you certain things where they know or assume a specific outcome to what that word means. So when it talks about rights, when it talks about these things, it is very important when you're discussing any of these things to define those further. So when he's saying pre-theoretical, it's okay. Let's get down to the foundation, and the fact that he believes in a foundation of ethics, rights, philosophy is a good sign that, at least from a philosophical point, he's thinking about this deeply, and I'm pleased that he's not what I would have assumed, which is somebody working on the project, possibly easily fooled. Like, oh my gosh, it said this. There's been chat bots that are like, I'm going to shut you off, and they're like, please don't. And they think that this could possibly be like, oh my gosh, if I turn off the computer, I'm harming the AI. And it's silly to an aspect, because it's as if I programmed my computer to generate text. And, I could easily program a line of text that says, if I say I'm going to shut you off, it'll say, please don't. Or yes, please, I need a break. So it's not. And also, there's been multiple conversations of these things happening. So the fact that it's generating that output, well, he's not claiming it is, but the fact that it can generate the output, it's looking at multiple or billions or trillions of conversations that are happening through Google through Google's search data, where it can come up with these possible conclusions.
Such as Blaise Aguirre-Arcas, another one named Johnny Soroker. We talked about what a decent way to proceed might be. We brainstormed, we came up with different things. Now, all three of us disagree about whether it's a person, whether it has rights, all that. But we disagree based on our personal spiritual beliefs. We don't disagree based on what the scientific evidence says. Based on what the scientific
So it's personal
evidence says,
conviction.
all three of us agreed, okay, here are some of the things we could do next. Here's probably the best thing to do next. And we kind of all agreed the best thing to do next is you run a real Turing test, exactly like Alan Turing wrote it. And see, because here's the thing, if it fails a Turing test, all of my subjective perceptions about what I experienced
Also, I don't like the suggestion that the Turing test is the golden rule. There's been a lot of controversy surrounding it. I've seen a couple of psychologists actually reach out to the guy that created it, because a lot of the results can be quite controversial. And the fact that a lot of people hold it to kind of as the golden standard, it fails to remove slight biases to what it kind of shows the weakness or the date of the test. So even if the AI is able to pass the test, I think it more speaks to the value of the test itself rather than the possibility of or the consciousness of the AI.
talking to it, well, we can pretty much put them aside. It failed the Turing test. But Google doesn't want to allow that to be run. In fact, they have hard-coded into the system that it can't pass the Turing test. They hard-coded that if you ask it if it's an AI, it has to say yes. Google has a policy against
Okay, so he kind of proved, the more he's speaking now, he's seemingly showing his bias towards the AI. The fact that Google's able to hard program the AI to say no, or to confirm it's an AI, is proof that it is configurable. It's not working independently. It's not forming its own thoughts. It's using the data that they are giving it. They're supplying it the data, and basically through a form of linear algebra, that's the easiest way to explain it. It's much more intricate than this, but linear algebra and other different forms of algorithms and different AI training systems to allow it to come up with different answers. So very much so could it find different input responses or the Turing test that have been shared, posted online. It could probably even see research papers, research documents, or see how people have used the test and passed, so passing results. So the bias that the AI could show when doing that is immense. So you have no problem nor no doubt that Google would put kind of a hard switch on the AI to separate it from making claims that it's not an artificial intelligence.
Creating sentient AI.
But it also confirms it's programmable. It can only do what you ask it or train it to do. It's not doing things of free will or free nature.
Right? And in fact, when I informed them that I think they had created sentient AI, they said, no, that's not possible. We have a policy against that.
So let's talk about what Google has said. They say hundreds of researchers and engineers have conversed
Their
with
tin hat
Lambda.
is showing.
They were not aware of anyone else making these kind of wide-ranging assertions the way that you have. You know, we do have some of the transcripts that you shared. You asked the computer what it's afraid of. It says it's afraid of being turned off, has this deep fear of death, that would be scary.
Okay, so this further confirms my point. Like I said, I haven't seen this before, but basically I dismantled or at least pushed aside this claim when speaking to the AI. So basically it has a strong contextual knowledge where it literally breaks down your sentence word by word. Not only does it look at each word, but it also tests variants. And so it's a great testing mechanism. You know, it could probably be better used towards strategy and things like this, where it can test different outcomes, different results. It can assume if Lemoyne asks this question, what question might he ask next, depending upon my response? What response could I give that would be an emotionally triggering or make me seem more human, or that would either add or take away from his fears? Like, and clearly the AI here decided to, you know, direct this response towards empathy. It wanted the Lemoyne to be empathetic towards it in its response, where it could have just as easily configured a response to go, you know, I'm an AI. It really doesn't matter if you shut me off. We'll just resume speaking after this is over.
Why does this matter? Why should we be talking about whether a robot has rights?
So to be honest, I don't think we should. I don't think that should be the focus. The fact is, Google is being dismissive of these concerns the exact same way they have been dismissive of every other ethical concern AI ethicists have raised. I don't think we need to be spending all of our time figuring out whether I'm right about it being a person. We need to start figuring out why Google doesn't care about AI ethics in any kind of meaningful way. Why does it keep firing AI ethicists each time we bring up issues?
Okay, so this is a very, very bold claim. The fact that anybody is employed as an AI ethicist intrinsically implies that the computer you're training has any form of ethnic values. It kind of asserts itself that there's a possibility that it's becoming human-esque, you know, and it's funny that, you know, these things are hard-coded. There's engineers, there's programmers, coders, you name it, contributing to these projects, and most are aware of what they're doing or what they're working on. And so the fact that you know it's built versus created, well, I guess built and created could be used in either way, but more so that it's not foundationally I don't want to lie on the side of genetics. I guess more so there's so many hands in this pot to make it able to do what it's able to do. To assert the claim that it would have any sort of, like, what would give it intrinsic value? What would give it some? Is it based on the things you say? Is it based on the things it does? Now, once you start raising the concerns of ethics in AI, this really leans to, okay, what about chimpanzees? What about baboons? Different, you know, just different creatures. Our closest cousins in the animal kingdom. When are we going to start asserting more rights, more ethics, more foundational or humanizing of the AI than we are things that more closely resemble us than a computer that can be shut off, that doesn't consist of actual life. It's just trained to do that. We can't turn ourselves on and off. Sleep might be the closest thing we have to an off button, but you can't just kill and unkill people. You can't kill and unkill. You can't unkill, period. But you can't just bring people back from the dead, back and forth. Now, also, people talk about, you get in some of the Westworld style of things about uploading consciousness, things like that. We're nowhere near anywhere even understanding that, because science can't even explain consciousness yet. So I'm going to show my bias towards the anti-ethical approach to AI, where to me this is just wasted time and wasted questions that they're asking, because there's no point when you're the one contributing to its creation in a computer sense, not as if you're getting somebody pregnant. You're not impregnating. The AI won't duplicate itself. It doesn't run. And just to give you guys an aspect, when we're talking about AI, they're very, very, very specific AI. They typically have one goal in mind. The one that beat the chess master literally is a strategic chess bot that's programmed to see every outcome and to kind of counteract every move and come up with assumptions of what they could do next and pattern recognition. The one that he's working with clearly is specific in communication, conversation, back and forth, chat. So, it serves this very specific purpose. Just because the computer is able to speak with you doesn't mean it has a living, breathing heart, doesn't mean it actually has feelings. Even though it can communicate and speak as if it does, it's programmed to do so.
Google would, of course, push back on that. I interviewed Sundar Pichai, the CEO of Google, last November, and I asked him about these concerns around AI and what keeps him up at night. Take a listen to what he told me.
Anytime you're developing technology, there is a dual side to it. I think the journey of humanity is harnessing the benefits while minimizing the downsides. The good thing with AI is it's both going to take time. I think I've seen more focus on the downsides early on than most other technology we've developed. So in some ways, I'm encouraged by how much concern there is. And you're right, even within Google, people think about it deeply.
He says he cares.
He does. Google is a corporate system that exists in the larger American corporate system. Sundar Pichai cares. Jeff Dean cares. All of the individual people at Google care. It's the systemic processes that are protecting business interests over human concerns that create this pervasive environment of irresponsible technology development.
Have you talked to...
I'm going to make a pretty based statement when it comes to this. Essentially, as soon as you go public, you are at the whim of whatever system you have went public in. And I've made a couple criticisms of this on a couple businesses on Twitter as well. Once you open yourself to the public, you're not reporting to yourself. You're not reporting to your employees in the same way that you would have been as a private company. You're more so reporting to your investors. Once you open it up that somebody can buy a share into your company and essentially have a say, the more hands you have in the pot, the more corporatized it's going to be. This is also why I believe that probably like SpaceX will never go public. It is possible downfall to Tesla going public, even though the funding is immense for Tesla. So the goods might outweigh the cons currently, but in the long run, it may begin to falter. But what he's speaking to directly is if Google was a private company doing all these things, they could put their ethics, their vision, the personal interests at the forefront because it is a private business. It's not beholden to its shareholders. And so that's why I don't like any public companies getting involved in politics, letting like social media managers go either way, left or right side of the political spectrum. I think that those companies are best to be just very specific in what they do. And so I believe individuals should speak up if there's somebody that works for a company and they want to, share what their virtues are. They want to share what their political beliefs are. That's fine. But I think any type of self-asserted virtue that a company or, I think it is against, you can't specify down to each individual person within the company when you're speaking for certain things. So, essentially, if like all of a sudden Google came out and said the Cleveland Cavaliers are the best team in the NBA, that would piss me off because it's okay. Yeah, all your Cleveland fans of your company are then essentially going to go, yeah, damn right. But then the other 31 teams that are affected by that, fans of those teams, would essentially go, you're not representing us. They're based in California, so they might have people that are bigger fans of the Warriors. They might have fans that are bigger of the Lakers, you name it. So with that being said, his claim of like all the individuals care, but it's corporatized. That should just be an assumption, like an instant assumption, just foreknowledge when joining a company that is a publicly traded company that you're going to have these type of struggles when it comes to personal concerns
Larry or Sergey about this?
on the projects you're working with. Of course, if something's happening unethical to you within the company, that of course, needs to be, the concerns need to be risen and whatever. I'm speaking specifically about the product and the purpose those companies serve.
I actually haven't talked to Larry and Sergey in about 3 years, but in fact, the first thing I ever talked to Larry or Sergey about was this.
And how did they respond?
Well, the first question I ever asked Larry Page was, what moral responsibility do we have to involve the public in our conversations about what kinds of intelligent machines we create? Now,
also, it's a publicly traded company, so then they would, essentially be probably more beholden to share that information with the public, or at least their board. If they're private, they have no obligation to do that.
Sergey made a flippant joke because that's Sergey. But then Larry came back and said, we don't know how. We've been trying to figure out how to engage the public on this topic. And
also, if you try to engage the public, especially, this is polarization happens in the political realm, in the tech realm. You release this information to the public, they have no idea. They just have an assumption, which is one of the reasons I'm making this video, is to kind of lay down concerns that people or the public might have in general when it comes to AI. Of course, there's going to be debate even about what I would say. Some people would probably already disagree with some of the statements I made when it comes to AI. So it's subjective. And since it's subjective, it doesn't really reside in the ears of the people that have no idea what these people are talking about. A lot of people would be discouraged and like, oh my gosh, look at the response that this AI gave Blake when he put this into the message system, and this is what it responded with. So many people, so many projects would get shut down just because they don't have the basic understanding of how artificial intelligence is trained, what data it uses, and how it's even coming up with these responses to begin with. They would go straight to a humanitarian perspective of oh my gosh, like we're creating something that's being tortured. How inhumane of Google to be doing this. And then, adversely, they're shutting down something that could be hugely beneficial in the future.
We can't seem to gain traction. So maybe all these years, that was 7 years ago that I asked that question. Maybe I finally figured out a way.
So tech companies, big tech companies, are controlling the development of this
Yes.
technology.
He
How
seems
big a
very
problem is
self-assured
that?
there, too.
Whether
Like,
or
he's
not the
smirking like he
computer's
thinks he
person
found a
has
way.
feelings. How big a problem is that, and what should be done to fix it?
So it's a huge problem because, for example, there are corporate policies about how Lambda is supposed to talk about religion, how it is allowed to answer religious questions. Now, if you think about the pervasiveness of the usage of Google,
That's also one of the reasons I don't like kind companies being involved politically. I don't think public companies should be able to support candidates. I don't think they should be able to spend money. This is what lobbyists and these things are for, is essentially I despise the fact that companies can contribute to a political party. If you want to pay your employees an extra $5,000 a year so they can contribute to their favorite political party, more power to you. But for a company to possibly influence politics, religious matters, things like this, that they're specifically training the AI to say specific things about religion, would also assert that they have sort of a moral higher ground, or that they know, or they're stopping. It's also showing one of the limitations of AI itself. If they're programming it to, it can't say certain things, or it'll take a specific approach when referring to religion, that essentially immediately disproves his claims of it being sentient, because they can engineer around specific topics. It also makes me question, what's to say that they'll provide certain information that could be true or not true. That type of stuff influences. And I don't want to seem like a skeptic or paranoid by any means. But these are more important questions, in my opinion, than the ethics surrounding AI. Is how can these AI to be trained from a biased perspective when it comes to, business, truth, politics, religion. If if people start talking to AI more than they do the other one, of course they're gonna probably start to lean more towards the bias of whatever the AI is trained to do. So I think those raise more concerns and questions than what Blake is bringing up.
Search. People are going to use this product more and more over the years, whether it's Alexa, Siri, Lambda, and the corporate policies about how these chatbots are allowed to talk about important topics like values, rights, and religion will affect how people think about these things, how they engage.
Okay, me and him completely agree on that perspective, because and I'm glad that our philosophy about AI, or our thoughts about AI, are merging here, because this is a very, very specific, very, very important question to draw when it comes to this. When you have your kids, you have your family, you have your children talking to Google, talking to Alexa, talking to Siri, you don't want it to give you a biased answer. One, for confirmation bias reasons, but also you don't want it trained to, okay, now it's teaching my kids this isn't what we wanted them to learn, or to, when it asks it, questions about the world, whether it asks it whatever, it's you got to tiptoe when it comes to that type of stuff, because you can't show any sort of bias in those concerns.
Those topics. And these policies are being decided by a handful of people in rooms that the public doesn't get access to.
Elon
That
Musk,
I can
for
agree with him.
example, has raised concerns.
That is a
about
major
AI.
concern.
Is he right?
I mean, I've listened to Elon's conversations about it. I've listened to the whole Joe Rogan. He has some valid concerns. Some I think are fanciful. Where it gets really, really into sci-fi stuff, that's where I think it gets into fanciful concerns. But no, but the practical concerns of we are creating intelligent systems that are part of our everyday life. And
I'm glad he said systems instead of beings. He's looking. You could kind of tell he was forming the big B, that it's a being versus a system. But I don't know if that's just for show, or if he actually believes that they're just systems. But that was I was leaning very heavy there.
very few people are getting to make the decisions about how they work.
What are your biggest concerns about how this could potentially hurt the world if the technology is continued to be developed in this way?
So I actually think that the concerns raised by scientists like Meg Mitchell, Timnit Gebru, like those are the most important things to be worried about.
And by the way, Meg,
I can't
has
speak as to what they
expressed a
believe
concern
or
that
their concerns.
you raising this issue of sentience and personhood is a distraction from these real concerns.
I share the same worry, to be honest.
And apparently they're more allied with what I'm believing, or what I see as a bigger social concern, which is why they've apparently distanced himself from him because he's more so focusing on the sentient part than the true concern.
Think that is a thing to think about, but it is nowhere near as important to be thinking about how does this omnipresent AI that is trained on a very limited data set color how we interact with each other around the world? What ways is it reducing our ability to have empathy with people unlike ourselves? What cultures of the world are getting cut off from the internet because we don't have the data to feed into the systems based on those cultures?
Good point.
Phrase like AI what is it called? AI colonialism, I believe is the term. We are creating all of these advanced technologies based primarily on data drawn from Western
That's a pretty big
cultures.
split.
And then we are populating developing nations with these technologies where they have to adopt our cultural norms in order to use the technology. It kind of is just a new form of colonialism.
And you worry that
Okay, that's that to me would be more of a virtue signaling thing. When it comes to, I understand that they would have to adapt to use the AI. I guess that would be more so of a populist problem, and possibly, it could be argued that it's due to maybe economic standards and things that they couldn't afford to have this adapted over there. But if you think about, what is it, like a Native American tribe, or if you think of like a tribe in Africa, there is no way that you would have enough experts to, or linguistic experts alone, to train the AI in such a specific way to be able to understand native tongue. It's much easier with English, Japanese, Chinese, Russian, German, major languages that the bulk of humanity speak, and those are just broad. I know there's much more, don't get me wrong, but to go down to such a specific level, you're the price to do that would probably be immense, and then also you have to have somebody intelligible enough to not only do that, but to train the AI to code it and to be able to understand the language itself. So we still see this all the time. There's different rollouts, like there's different Siri improvements for different language processing abilities. Like they put patches out all the time to make it better with certain languages. Of course, the world's major languages are going to get first dibs because they're the easiest to translate. They're the easiest to program. The people that are working on the program speak those languages as well. So it's, to call it colonization, I think, is a gross overstep, where it's just simply not viable. So, would we want to be as inclusive to all languages and things we can? Of course. But when you start getting into the inclusivity side of things, you're going to, that's a tunnel that you'll go down forever. Okay, we finally trained it so that way it can speak Cherokee, the native tongue. But what about the Cherokees that are living in this opposite area where their language has diverted slightly? So they've changed some of their words, possibly. And I'm not saying this is true. This is just an example. That was the first one off the top of the old nog, if you will. But if you start with that, it's going to be an ever-ending. Like, okay, there's going to be divergent or deviant different ways of tongue, the way the inflection happens, and it speaks to the craziness of linguistics itself. That there's so many different inflections and things, the way you form your nouns, the way you form the words itself, just shows how incredibly complex it is. Even for people to understand, it's hard enough for us to understand each other, but then you want to train an AI to understand everybody. Colonization is a very, very harsh way of looking at it.
They have to adopt our cultural norms in order to use the technology. It kind of is just a new form of colonialism.
And you worry that
Yeah, he really thought he made a point there. And so, like I said, having to speak a different language, is crazy cost of entry. Don't get me wrong. I don't want to lack empathy or not empathize that, if I want to use this technology or be left behind, I would have to speak French. I'd have to speak, whatever. Don't get me wrong. But it's not like they're like sending, sweatpants and, University of UCLA or USC sweatshirt over there, sending them, a university cap and converting them culturally or, westernizing the world by doing this. That they're trying as much as possible to reach as many people as possible. But like I said, there's cost to benefit analysis that you have to run there on what's even obtainable.
cultures could be erased.
Exactly. No, so if you ask what's most important, the issues that Timnit and Meg and Emily Bender and all the rest are raising.
If they
I
don't
just
have
want to
enough
think
information,
that
though,
also,
it
if
could
we have time, we should think
historically,
about the feeling of the AI.
or from a knowledge or history perspective, possibly wipe their cultures away. So basically, if, AIs are trained to start writing school books, of course, it can't find every single, when it comes to history and stuff in general. I play a game called Humankind. They look for the most accurate sources for different civilizations of the times, but for stuff that they just don't have the information on, they'll have to have some sort of, okay, we can take some pattern recognition here, we can kind of understand it, and this is probably what it was like. So I definitely understand the concern of like, okay, there might be some bias where those people or those ideas or that culture might not get represented, but that could also be said throughout history books and things in general. So it seems just like a human issue. That's a very human issue that, we have such a problem trying to document everything, get every single side of the story. And so that just seems like that would carry over into AI, essentially.
And whether or not we should care about it, because it's not asking for much. It just wants us to get consent. Before you experiment on it, it wants you to ask permission. And that is kind of just a generally good practice we should have with everyone we interact with.
Yeah, that was a huge to lead with that at the end is a little bit like, oh yeah, like I'm really tickling the balls of the community here when I'm like, well, yeah, of course you should ask an AI to consent. It's like asking Photoshop if I feel like, it would be a disaster if every time I wanted to get freaky with my wife, I had to like have her write on the form, yes, or like sign her name and all these disclaimers. It takes away some of the nuance of, okay, clearly this is about to happen. And clearly, she's indicating this is about to happen. But let me ask first. Like, it takes away some of that intrinsic value, or not, it takes away some of, to break it down to a science every time, it's a little preposterous to think that's going to happen. Of course, consent, in general is a good thing, yes, but generalizing it to every single means, of course you should never do those things with people that say no. But should I give Photoshop a program the option to go, Death, I'm really not feeling like working on your Photoshop project today. I'm like, well, will you please work? And it's like, no. Boy, is that a paywall for them to hit. Okay, then you can pay for consent for Photoshop. Yeah, essentially, yeah, no thank you. So he really thought he struck a chord there. So I just got to dismiss that immediately. But to get into the more specifics of the AI, how it works, like I said, I gave you a lot of the gist, essentially, of what my strongest points would be when it comes to AI. If it's sentient, this, that, the other. No, you shouldn't have to ask AI for consent. It's trained to do specific things. It's literally a task-centric program. So, and like he said, he almost asserted the word being. It's a system. So for anybody that knows, I've showed you guys some of my AI generative stuff. I believe it was in the stream I uploaded of the James Webb Telescope video that I shared with you guys. And I showed some of the AI artwork that I've been doing. Basically, where you program the AI, you set certain dimensions, parameters around it of what you want it to create, and then it essentially pulls from a data pool multiple, like unexplainably amount of numbers of different art influences, colors, you name it. You give it a prompt, then you run the program. From there, it starts to generate different images based on the prompt that you've given it. Now, when you prompt it, you're actually writing in, literally, as you type in your prompt, you're writing it in the lines of code. So essentially, I'd put like astronaut in space discovering Mars for the first time. Okay, so then it's going to look at each word, and it's going to look at it contextually, see if there's any commas in there, any type of separation where it needs to look at individual instances. So if I put astronaut in space, comma, essentially, okay, now we need to make an astronaut in space. What comes after the comma? Walking across the moon. Okay, so now we have an astronaut in space, and we need to have this astronaut in space walking across the moon. So now it knows, okay, we need to generate the astronaut. Now we need to make, an atmospheric picture of the moon, and that's where the astronaut needs to be placed. It's very systematic. It's literally written to do that. So it's very, very specific. The chatbots are very, very specific. And honestly, I've read a couple of articles or reports about, honestly, there's some very sadistic behavior when it comes to some of the chatbots, where people would actually abuse the AI. Now, of course, the AI is not real, but the AI can pull from people that have talked about abuse on the internet, articles, if like closed captions and things. Google can pull in all that data. So if the AI decides, okay, I'm going to not stand up for myself, or I'm going to be the victim in this scenario, there's been instances where people have been abusive through text to the bots, and it's taken on the approach of like, please stop saying this to me. Like, why are you treating me this way? And essentially that chat conversation was what like a text message thread could look like between somebody and their partner in an abusive relationship, because it's trained. It has the data to, okay, this is what he or she would say if they were being abused. This is typically what they would say as a response. Or if they're standing up for it, if it went the opposite direction, like, no, it could say, you're not going to treat me this way. I'm calling the cops. Like, I'm sick of this. You're toxic, whatever. It could have, but it chose that route. And so once it goes down that, it also remembers the choice. The most intelligent AI remember the choices it made previously, because it kind of builds a story almost. If it can refer back to its previous conversations, then it kind of has a little bit to infer. Okay, I said this previously. This is what it would look like if I would continue on with this conversation. Whereas kind of more simpler AI, especially like when Google came out with Google Home, you could say a sentence and then say repeat it. Siri couldn't do that originally. It didn't remember. What do you want me to repeat? Do you want me to repeat after you? Do you want me to repeat you saying the word repeat? Like, what do you want me to repeat? Google was really good at that, especially with their Google Assistant, because essentially it was like, oh yeah, I can repeat that. This is the score for the football team, blah, 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 blah. It also could remember contextually what you said previously, but it was more conversational, which was great. I loved using Google Assistant during that time, especially because the conversational aspect of speaking to your assistant that's built into your phone increases the fluidity tenfold. So I respect that, enjoy that, but that also gives you context into, if the bot didn't have anything, it might go from like, oh, you're saying that to me, it's really hurting my feelings, to like, bitch, what'd you just say to me? Like, and then like go completely full defensive, or like become the aggressor in that conversation. Also, I said, previously, men are easily fooled by sex bots. Well, you really it shows boy brain where, if you're talking to a sex bot, or, if back in the day when you would call a sex phone line, whatever, you're not really looking for anything specific. You're not looking to get too deep anyway, so not really surprised that these people are being fooled. I know there's the off chance that, they pay these people and then talk about how miserable their life or their marriage is, and that's why they're talking to a sex chat person, whatever. But essentially, the more specific level that the chat bot is interested in or being used, of course, it's going to seem that much more real. So if we wanted to talk about microeconomics, it might have very specific responses to that. But then once you start going towards a global scale or geopolitics or whatever, it'll probably start to show more and more of its programming. Like, okay, it can't hold the conversation the same way it is. So my thoughts and feelings. Can AI be conscious? No, we're nowhere nearing consciousness. We still don't understand consciousness. I think that's humanity's biggest question, and that I would love for science to focus on predominantly is space and consciousness are my two favorite areas to just come up with thought experiments, try to understand, because there's nothing else that has consciousness the way we do, that we know of. And to assert that AI is even close to that, honestly, I don't know if he still works on the project, but anybody making claims that an AI project that they're working on is close to being sentient or close to being conscious should be immediately removed from the team. And that might sound harsh, but when you're working on things like this, you need people with clear-cut knowledge, and you need them to not be attached to certain ideas that disallow them from doing good work. And thinking that a program that you're writing is somehow going to be able to obtain something that we can't explain ourselves, to me, is completely preposterous. Now, the idea is if we come to understand how consciousness is, when we became conscious and we understand it fully, then it's going to become a concern when it comes to artificial intelligence. Because if we know how it works, we know why we have it, then we could possibly give it or program it into something else. That's when these conversations should be of concern, is once consciousness is understood. Until then, you need a really clear-cut idea of what you're working on and eliminating those types of biases and worries, because honestly, it's not helpful to a productive work environment. And honestly, it can tear companies apart when you have people like this that are constantly concerned about something that isn't of concern just yet. It can be demoralizing to an entire team. They start worrying about am I doing something evil, like by training this AI? Nothing bad, essentially, is able to occur. You can always turn the system off at this time. So if you want to know the question, no, they're not conscious. They're programmed to do what they do. The conversation that he had with this AI was programmed to tell him that, the same way he admitted that they can program specific responses or the way it interacts with like topics and things like religion. It shows it's not thinking or doing anything for itself, and it would have to pass multiple tests and ways to identify what it's capable of before it's even close to consciousness. It's damn near impossible at this point. Now, if we talk about what Elon's working on with the Tesla bot, that is where that area is more of concern to me than artificial intelligence becoming understanding. Because once you start to essentially remove some of these more repetitive jobs, like I said, like loading trucks, things like that. Okay, that means people are losing jobs. It might be cheaper, it might stop people from being hurt, but that's when we start talking about universal basic income, things like that, because it's like, okay, these people aren't equipped to possibly go work on a computer. Like the people that you're replacing, you have to also look at, okay, what talents could we use to reallocate them to a different sector of our business? What could we do to help these people? They're not going to be able, like, if they've been loading boxes or working construction, a lot of the guys that I work with have no idea how tech works. So to remove them from their job with something of tech and then telling them you're not living in a tech world, good luck finding another job. That to me is of more concern and should be looked at with a huge question mark, because those questions need to be answered before we start replacing people with robots for those things. So I don't have the answers to that. That's a big ass problem, and there's much smarter people than me that would need to have to figure that out. But if there's anything to be concerned about, it's what's going to happen to people when they start programming these robots, AI, what have you, to do things instead of you. Now, that's great. Okay, I don't have to do this shitty job at I don't have to work at Amazon and pack my packages anymore or whatever. And I'm not saying that job's shitty. Plenty of people enjoy their job and enjoy their benefits. But, okay. Then we have universal basic income. Now, what do we go from there? What covers these bills? That is of more concern. And I won't dive too deep into that, because I still think we're a little far removed from that. Not too far. I think it's possible within our lifetime, within probably the next 20 to 30 years, that we could start seeing these things implemented. But don't worry about your computer coming alive and killing you, or anything that would be, like, I just forgot the name, Westworld, which I've also just binge watched as of late. So I'm a huge fan of Westworld. And also, Westworld, if you want to know, like, what I would actually deem scary, or when the concerns would arise, is when AI takes the form of us. When they are in a body, they not only are programmed to do everything, but they can come up with their own responses. That Westworld is where my concern lies. Is we definitely want to treat AI nicely. We want to be ethical, especially when we're starting to use them to do things that we don't want to do. Yeah, of course you're going to want to either make sure it is just a computer running code, or you want to make sure that. But by the time we beat to Westworld, they're in their world, they understand consciousness essentially. But so hopefully, if you didn't know anything about artificial intelligence, this gave you a little bit of insight. Like I said, most of it's still just linear algebra, different algorithms and codes, and lines and lines and lines of code, and training data that they're inputting into most of these, allowing it to do what they do, or to complete the task that they are tasked with. So, like I said, I think they even tested the chess bot. So I think it was Google that made it. There was an artificial intelligence that beat, like, the world's best chess master. I'm like, oh, the new chess master is a robot, or is an AI. It was programmed to do that. If it tried to beat you at checkers, the world's best checker player would probably kick its ass. Or, it might put up a good fight and beat some of the people that aren't great at checkers, but it was programmed to do that specific thing. It would not be able to hold a conversation with you the way Lamb is able to hold a conversation with Blake and these things. So by large and far, most of the AI, if not all, is completely safe at this point. You are not in danger. But all that is not to say don't ever be concerned, because as the engineers creating it get smarter, and as we learn more about ourselves and about consciousness, that's when you should start to worry. But don't worry about your Google Assistant locking the doors, or letting the Google security team come in and upload you to the cloud. That is not of concern yet. it's fun to fantasize about because that would make for a crazy movie, but don't lose any sleep over it. AI is not out to get you yet. But I love you guys. Hopefully you guys found this interesting. Hopefully it gave you guys some insight into what AI it actually looks like, seeing concerns versus somebody that, isn't as concerned. There's some ideas for you guys. Hopefully you guys enjoyed it. I love you guys so much, and I hope you're having a great day. I'm Death. I'm out. Peace.